So, thinking back at the part 1 and part 2, of course part of what sticks with me is this idea that we've all been part of the same experiment, but we all have our own unique experiences with it. And just because we're going to be in dialogue, I would love quickly, I know there's a lot of us, if just everybody could say their name, just so that we all are part of this third part together. So I'm Michèle.
I'm Julie.
I'm Gerald.
I'm Megan.
I'm Jen.
I'm Christy.
I'm Zoe.
Mindy. I'm Haley. Arletta.
Mara's sitting here. I'm Rob.
Literally.
I'm Emily.
Robert.
Sharon. Catherine.
Bob.
Colin. Alma. Lindsay.
Andy.
Megan.
Alec.
Diane.
Orit.
Christy. Randy. Kate. Marie.
Cher.
Carl. Me.
Nicole. Cora. Felicia. Hope. Adrian. Chantal.
Joe.
Maureen. Rebecca.
Smithy.
Sarah. Virginia. Catherine.
Christian.
Lonnie.
Jenna.
Rania.
Deborah.
Jessica.
Hi.
Evangel. Alana. Katie. Sally.
John.
Rebecca. Anna. King. Megan. Yoshi. Leah.
Alva.
Janine.
Thank you. And I'd like us to start in asking questions. So really thinking about the material we've just experienced, that's our experiment. What was your experience? And ask a question. Oops, that was my turn. And anybody can start.
So that you mean that we are all asking questions?
Yes.
That's what.
Yeah, I think everybody should ask a question based on the material.
I have one.
Yep.
Is the word strange being used as a pejorative?
It would be good if people said the names again when they
I am Christine.
Christine?
Christine.
Christine.
I have one actually. So I'm wondering if I'm Sally. Sorry. If there's a category for dancing that is like wedding dancing and club dancing, and then there's a category for choreography, is there a separate category or a difference for the dancer in concert dance and in street site-specific dance that isn't the same as the wedding dance and the club dance?
I have two, one of which is in the billing, the terminology of performative lecture. I'm interested in terms of like what qualifies a lecture as performative, or could you have a lecture that is not performative, or something like that. And the other for me is about, Alva, this concept you mentioned of boredom in performance that I actually find really interesting. And one of the things that came up in a conversation in the brief pause was the kind of extreme faux pas of using your phone in a performance, and how much our phones fill the space that boredom used to occupy. And like, how does the faux pas of no cell phone in a performance create that space for boredom? Or I don't know, something about the ritual of like, you can use people use phones at restaurants, whatever, blah, 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 but not during performances usually. So that intersection is curious about thoughts on that.
What is your name?
Alva.
And don't feel like you have to put your hand up and get my attention. Just please fill the space with questions. I'd love to hear from everybody.
I have two as well. One is more terminology based in terms of conversation, whether or not reorganization is synonymous to deconstructivism, and two, when is it that we find ourselves seeking reorganization? Like what part of our diachronic self do we find it? Is it at birth or is it when we mature?
I had a question for Deborah. This is Jess. You talked about staying in the question and without searching for answers. You also talked about watching other people being in the question as at learning from that. And I was hoping to have you talk more about the difference between finding answers and learning.
I also have a question for Deborah. How do you resist for me, the temptation to idealize the sort of current state as the highest point on the totem pole of experiences that are illustrated, of different questions that you've encountered step by step? How do you resist the urge to say the present is sort of an answer without kind of ending the questioning? And in anticipating a new question, do you already end up asking it, and are you then unleashing an avalanche of questions and have to hold certain ones back in order to navigate?
I'm interested in how the lessons of this reorganization in an embodied art will be applied to, say, process of creative writing, and something that you've come through abstraction and into examining embodied practice. How would you take those lessons back out again through a more abstract and intellectual form?
Two questions, one for Janine. What score were you doing with the video? Where was your consciousness? Is that the word? I don't know. What were you tracking? The score. And then also for Alva, at what point could dance possibly not be representational? And if you were sourcing from a zillion cells or from even geometry, in terms of an innate, inherent sense of geometry, does it cease to be representational in your mind? If it's experienced, fully experienced, does it cease to be representational?
Dance.
Yeah, but certain kinds of dance, like cellular dance, or I don't know, other kinds of dance.
I have a question for Deborah. You were talking about presumptions, and I was curious as to whether they might be helpful as stepping stones towards understanding something better, so long as you don't attach yourself to what you're presuming, but you're open to changing your mind down the road.
Alva and Deborah, about the role of the pauses in your speaking to us, because I know it's not just about the content of what you are saying. So, yeah, just questions about other spaces.
I have a question for Deborah too, because in her talking about all these options, even by turning your fucking head, it was kind of like, I'm wondering with Deborah, how you filter all of these options when you create your scores.
My name is Carl. I have a question for Deborah. You talked about how your dance is your practice and reorienting yourself and exploring your relationship with people in time and space. Is that what your dance is about, or is that just a setting within which you make dances about many things?
I'm Virginia, and in
thinking about what we were doing in the workshop with Janine today and in listening to everyone's conversations, I've kind of been having these words keep coming up: noticing, doing, making, creating, experience, experimenting, and I'm wondering about the dialogue between those ideas, this notion of making something versus creating something, and how those are perhaps different, and how that relates to the idea of an organized activity versus choreography. It's kind of just a general question for the room.
Can you list it one more time?
Yeah, noticing, doing, making, creating, experience, and experimenting. Kind of all these notions that have been, and then the idea of choreography and organized activity. That's just, there's a dialogue that seems to exist between all of these ideas, and I think is worth noticing.
I have a question about the difference between an end and an ending.
What is the question?
I want to know if one of them lasts longer than the other.
I'm Christy, and I'm thinking about what you were talking about, Alva, how you have put things out into the world and published them with one audience in mind, and then another audience is somehow drawn. And when I think about our audience this evening, and we're kind of still a very inside art, dance crowd in terms of similarities, I see a lot of familiar faces, and how when we are also presenting or sharing dance, we might appeal to others. And there's, you know, a certain lack of willingness maybe to engage with this kind of language about it that we haven't quite cracked yet.
I'm Jennifer. I have a question for Alva. You were talking about art relative to boredom, and I had an experience in James Turrell's one of his live installations many decades ago, where I was so completely physically disoriented that I went through a series of emotions, including fear, almost panic, and then a sense of wonder, of opening of something I had never experienced before. That was absolutely thrilling to me and had an effect on my life overall. And it's a sensory experience, but it's also changed me and how I move through the world. And I guess that's the opposite of word. And I'm wondering how you relate to that, how what you've been talking about relates to that experience.
My name is Amelia. I have a question for Alva. I heard you saying the difference between dancing at a club or dancing at a wedding versus choreography. And I was wondering where improvisation comes into play, or maybe the kind of dance that we do, not necessarily for someone to watch us, but simply the act of some sort of ritual or a community practice.
Amelia. I have a question. Wondering, Alva, if in your research, if there are cultural factors you've identified that combine to give cultures and societies to make them feel or to help them value this process of reorganizing oneself more than other cultures. So I feel like in the United States, that's not especially prized. at least in terms of an artist context, or an art consuming art context. I'm wondering if you notice that as being
I have a question for Deborah, and it's also about boredom. Even though Alva brought it up, just because boredom is something that's difficult to think about because it kind of avoids thought. So I was just wondering what your relationship with boredom is, whether you avoid it, savor it, or alchemize it, or whatever.
I'm Maureen, and I have appreciated the other people asking these questions because it helped refine this question about time to boredom, and just noticing that, my greatest art experiences have happened in, small audiences or giant audiences where the boring thing happens and then the almost nausea and disorientation and then breakthrough, like this is transcendent and amazing. And then personally, it happened to me because somebody brought up culture, like having to spend a lot of time in India and in family situations because my husband's from there, and it was the same feeling of like I'm stuck in these rooms with family members and I can't do anything and I have no self. I can't move. It's not like I'm trapped there, but that sense of self is really disturbed, and then all of a sudden it doesn't happen all of a sudden that I get a breakthrough, but maybe months later I get a breakthrough, and it just doesn't seem possible without kind of a boredom and a nausea, which maybe is just perceptual habit changing or something, I don't know. So I'm wondering if there's another word for that, like besides boredom, that comes with nausea and perception, maybe in that realm.
I'm Smithy. So we create disruption, and how many times do we create that disruption before it becomes the norm or not disruptive, or familiar, or I don't know what the word is there. But I see choreography as a way to continue a disruption, and also a way to stagnate it in some ways as well.
I have a related question, perhaps. I'm Rebecca. I'm actually interested in habit, and is there maybe something fascinating about habits, and does a habit have to be that thing that we already code as that thing which must be disrupted before we even know what it is, because it's the thing that we don't know what it is because we don't think about it? And that's my question.
I have a question. What is the difference between experimentation, exploration, and practice?
Say it again.
Experimentation, exploration, and practice. Can you get it?
Sorry. Rebecca, can you repeat your question? Sorry,
Didn't understand your question.
It's just about, I think we have maybe, okay, I'm going to get myself caught in a circle here, but a habit of thinking about habits as the thing which we must disrupt, with the thing that must be not good that we're doing, that we should be doing something other than what we habitually do, and that would bring transformation or some other way of seeing. And I'm interested in, actually maybe there's something worth seeing in what our habits consist of.
Yeah, I guess that's my
related to my question about the disruption is interested in the continuity between disruptive art and traditional art. Traditional art is disruption has already been achieved. I don't see him it's been opposed, and in my life, penalty opposed. Pretty much.
I have a question that was sparked by Deborah, your distinction between using the terminology of studio or lab, and lab's kind of specific scientific connotations, and then connecting that to, Alva, your point about how hard it is to have specific judgments about the making of art, that you come out the tail end, and unlike a car where you can do a safety test or a scientific experiment where you have a scientific method for judging whether or not the hypothesis was correct. In art, it's this much more amalgamous thing. And as you're using this terminology of lab, and you're using this idea of how can we judge this, I'm just curious about the intersection of studio and lab and judgment of product, or the amalgamous nature of a process, how those two meet.
My name is Christian. I have a question for Deborah. I guess it was for both of you about repetition. There's a time in terms of this whole discussion about moments of change and disruption, suggesting transformation, change. Yeah. So just in your contribution of your work, how have you dealt with repetition and that? Think about habit, that this constant drive we have in dance making to try to break habit, as though it's this thing that you can grab and break. And I'm just kind of curious your relationship to repetition relative to recreating a past or making a new future.
My name is Jessica. I have a question about the value of repeating things over and over again, and the value of hearing things a couple of times, said twice.
I have a question about, so much of this sounds like disruption has to do with disorientation and discomfort. I'd like to know if there's any place for pleasure in any of this. If that's instructive, or whether it's all dosage. Dosage.
My question would be, what is repetition? What are you calling repetition?
Not a question, but a comment. Sorry if I'm not complying. I think in slightly different ways, but also in similar ways, you are both facilitating a relationship with uncertainty and living with contradiction. And I like that very, for me it's very pleasurable. You're facilitating a relationship with contradiction and uncertainty. So, and I think it's very useful. For me it's pleasurable, but maybe other people they don't like it.
I have a question about Julie, about disruption. I actually come from a tech background, not from a dance background, but some work performances. So disruption, obviously, in my industry is considered good, but often is very exploitative. So we were talking before about Alva, you talked about emancipation, one of the ultimate outcomes is emancipation. So I'm wondering, Alec, you talked about how you judge products. Obviously, the main products are outraged. So, by explicit criteria, and you have exposed to have more open criteria to this work. So I'm wondering as a philosopher, there's ethics coming as a way of making assessment around disruption that has emancipatory value and what disruption actually has exploitative aspects to it. And I'll just make one other comment, and that is, actually I'm breastfeeding at the moment. Not this very moment. And it's a daughter who doesn't need it for food, it's entirely dialogue. She's 3.
I'm also breastfeeding a 3-year-old at the moment. And my question is kind of vague to me, so I'm just opening my mouth and hoping that it will become clear as I speak. I was really excited about the concept of seeing the space as a continuation of the sky, and that sky approaching my body, and the realization that when we look at the body in the cellular level and then smaller and smaller in the molecular level, that sky is actually going through me. And I'm becoming the space somehow. And what does that do to my relationship with the space and with the people who are also becoming the space when I'm dancing?
My name's Yoshi. You inspired me because I also don't feel like I have a fully formed question. But it was interesting to me. You talked about how Plato said that, or believed that art needs to disrupt, and how boredom is sometimes great art makes you bored. And it just makes me curious. I know this is a really big question that doesn't have an answer, but how do you know that art is disruptive? And if your reaction to it isn't necessarily positive, how do you tell if it's effective, and where is that line?
I have a question. I'm Randy, and my question is for Michèle. I was curious, as a facilitator, curator, how through 6 iterations, what you thought you were doing has changed.
I have a last question. At which point, if any point, do you feel as if your body has an objecthood, like is something that is like, okay, object, and to which point language has weeks of like modeling the definition of your body with the object, and I could go on. But really, if there's ever a point of objecthood with your body.
Before the show today, I was talking to my friend Kalea, and we were talking about Janine's performance last night. She brought her boyfriend with her, and I asked, how did he like it? And she was like, oh my God, he loved it. And he said he's becoming a junkie for shocking and different and life-changing performances, and that he has to see things that are more different and just change him and rearrange and reorganize him in that sense. And it really made me wonder, also in the workshop today, I realized during the speaking exercises that I came into art attempting to solidify my identity, and now I've transitioned into an artist seeking to explore experience. And so I see a shift in identity and in this sort of junkie mentality of constantly wanting to be reorganized in our own experience. I'm wondering if I'm avoiding my own identity, if I'm constantly trying to rearrange and change who I am through practice.
My name's Arletta. I'm interested in, Deborah, in your relationship to speaking and text in your practice. This practice of a multiple million cellular body, how you also utilize language.
I guess I'll follow that. And I'm also thinking of Alex's original question about the concept of the definition of performative lecture. I was curious what you think of as the distinction between the lecture you just delivered and a performance from a solo of yours, or maybe if there are similarities that are meaningful for you, particularly in the context that Alva's sketch of bringing together philosophical inquiry or Socratic dialogue with choreography. I just was curious.
I'm Nicole, and I'm referring to the arts and them organizing ourselves, being organized in arts as a tendency, and how the approach of reorganizing, or I think also practice in itself, can, you know, what is the other when it's not linear? What are the notions of multiple or non-linear stratas experiencing simultaneously somewhere in that area? Does that make sense as a question? Is that facilitated through that reorganizational approach? Maybe.
You had mentioned this term of disruption, and this is something that has stuck for me, and I just want to bring up as a critique or maybe a question, is like why that word and why that idea. The reason it's been coming up for me is like global warming is disruptive, or if I made you a breakfast and set it down and then threw it on the floor and said, I'm disrupting your breakfast. You're like, what the hell are you doing? Let me eat my food. What does it mean to practice in peace? What does it mean to protect? What does it mean to persevere or hold on to something? Versus this idea of constantly upending. I don't know, it's something that's been sticking with me a lot through the discourse that the tech industry uses, but then to hear it again, I'm like, damn it. I don't know.
My name is Mara. I have a question about language. I was inspired, Deborah, by your use of the way you talked about presuming and serving as wrong or bad or problematic, or wrong words to use, and how that instantaneously invigorated your practice. And I wonder, Alva, if you've also experienced that with language. And I just wrote down a few words that I was like, oh, those are problematic for me, because I just was interested in that, like that art is making a product or using the sky. I don't know, I'm just curious in what ways the heavier histories of those words remain, and what ways they're erased or transformed, and they're like the shadows of the words, the usage of the shadows.
And how do you compare our American questions to European questions?
articulation of a question. And as these questions are kind of what everyone expects to gain from articulating the question.
My name is Anna. I have a question for Alva. Even if you don't consider yourself to be a dancer or a choreographer, if you were to choreograph, how do you think you would go about it?
Questions about Deborah. I took an intensive with you like 17 years ago, a really long time ago, and I've seen you perform. And my experience of both witnessing you performing, or allowing us to see you, and doing that with you as a practice. Felt more like allowing the cellular body to be a question rather than asking questions. I don't know, maybe there's something like semantic for me about the challenge of talking about this stuff in a really kind of mental verbal way that makes it seem like your practice is like, I'm asking all these questions all the time with my head, as opposed to, which I feel like actually, my experience of you and your practice is actually allowing all bazillion cells to be the living question. And I'm curious how we can do that in a roundtable discussion that can get very mental verbal.
My question is, are we sharing this making a distinction between disruption and reorganization?
I have a question related to Sarah's question. Are we making a distinction between dancing and thinking?
I have a question about disruption. Where does patience come in terms of waiting for change to happen, or is it that we have to actively be the trigger to change something?
And similar to that, actually, the notion of allowing something versus instigating a change.
I'm curious about when we respond to the present moment, if we're using our imagination.
My question is, how do you use language to describe your art, and how do you find a connection between speaking, fully express what you want to express, but not necessarily what you want to say?
I'm being reminded of something Fritz Perls said at one point about boredom being a cover-up or maybe something else that's going on. So I'm wondering if facing boredom in an artistic experience could maybe be like the confrontation of having an emotional experience.
Are we thinking about dancing, or are we dancing about thinking?
This is for Michèle. What does reorganization have to do with empathy?
What to do with
empathy?
I'm wondering if we can ever really truly be non-habitual. I mean, we are what we are, and we're comprised of what we're comprised of. Maybe we'll respond to a new stimulus in the way we know how to respond to a new stimulus.
Is everybody gone?
I'm wondering about your distinction between, or suggested distinction between disruption and reorganization. And I'm wondering if reorganization, I wonder if it's different because it like recognizes and inherently kind of respects that there is organization, but doesn't stay satisfied with passively submitting to it.
I have a question for Deborah. You mentioned that San Francisco dance has a bubble feeling to it, and I wonder what that means to you, and if other bubbles in which you have experienced dance are different or the same, and how are those bubbles created, from the inside or from the outside?
I have a question. Is reorganization, the idea of reorganizing, is it a scaffold or is it just different?
I'm Cora, and a lot of what we've discussed is about the responsibility of sort of the primary creator, or like choreographer. And I'm curious about the responsibility of the performers, because often in the dance realm they become just sort of physical, that they work in the physical realm, but not necessarily as much conceptually. I'm interested in maybe your opinions on the responsibilities of the performers in terms of thoughtfulness and intention for the overall piece.
Thank you so much. This has been really valuable, and it's time, so thank you.
Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, it's 6 local artists showing short works at the intersection of language and dance. Many of them are here tonight: Gerald Cassell, Maria Kerr, Maureen Whiting, Megan Nicely, Lauren Simpson, Jenny Stolberg, and myself. It's here at 7 p.m., so please come back tomorrow. If you appreciate this programming, Hope Mohr Dance would appreciate your financial support. ticket sales only cover a fraction of what it costs to bring artists like these to San Francisco. So there are remittance envelopes in your programs, and any donation makes a huge difference. Thanks so much.